Hi everybody. Welcome to the video lecture for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. A couple of things I want to point out before we start talking about the story. First of all, I'm going to try to keep these lectures on these stories as short as possible. It's probably going to clock in at around 30 minutes or so, but you won't just be standing here staring at my picture, because the next thing I want to bring up is that the best way to watch this video and understand it is to go ahead and go into the PowerPoint of the story, and it's usually done by the author's name. So for this one, we're doing Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So look for the Mary Shelley PowerPoint presentation. It'll likely be in the same folder as the instructions for the essay in the Dropbox. It'll be the Frankenstein folder. It's possible that it could be in a PowerPoint presentation folder if such a thing exists in your class. So I'd like for you to open that PowerPoint presentation up. You'll see a picture of Mary Shelley's portrait on the first slide. Just go to the second slide, and then it's best to just kind of follow along with that. Also have a copy of your book handy in case you feel the need to hit the pause button and go looking for whatever it is that we're talking about. So I'm going to pause for a second while you hit the pause button and go get the slideshow, and hit the play button when you're ready. Alright, so starting with the story, let's start by talking about Mary Shelley herself. Mary Shelley was actually the daughter of a pair of intellectuals and highly intelligent people, and she, because of her good genetics, was also highly intellectual, an avid writer, and extremely intelligent. So she was born to Mary Wollstonecraft, who is very well known as an early feminist, and she was one of the pioneers of feminist thought. And then Mary Shelley's dad was William Godwin. Now, Mary Wollstonecraft did not get to know her daughter Mary Shelley very well, because Wollstonecraft died within 2 weeks of giving birth to Mary Shelley because of complications that happened due to the childbirth. So here is one of the world's foremost feminists, intellectuals, and a pioneer in the field, and yet she died in childbirth, giving birth to Mary Shelley. But what she left behind when she did that was an author that gave us Frankenstein, one of the classic Gothic horror novels of all time. In 1814, when Mary Shelley was about 16 years old, she was actually married Godwin at the time, obviously, because she was William Godwin's daughter. She met and fell in love with a married poet by the name of Percy Bysshe Shelley. Percy Shelley was quite an accomplished author of his own, and so basically, Mary and Percy, because they were so in love, they eloped and they left England. Mary Shelley's dad, William Godwin, was very furious about this. In fact, it actually damaged their relationship to a certain extent. But they did stay married until Percy Shelley's death, and Mary Shelley actually made a career after that of keeping his legacy alive. So if we go to the next slide, Mary was inspired to write Frankenstein while on vacation with Percy at Lord Byron's summer retreat in Switzerland. And that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, because that's pretty legendary in and of itself. When Mary was only 24 and she had a child, the only child that survived, that would end up surviving into adulthood, she did have a couple of miscarriages, but Percy Shelley died in a boating accident. He drowned off the coast of Italy. And so after that, Mary Shelley basically, she did write some more books, but she never found the success that she found with Frankenstein. And for the most part, she spent the rest of her life trying to make sure that Percy Bysshe Shelley's legacy survived on and on. And so Mary is now buried in London, next to her parents at St. Peter's Church in Bournemouth. So we're going to talk a little bit next to a slide about the composition of Frankenstein. This is a legend in and of itself. Mary Shelley was only about 16 or 17 years old. She and Percy were on vacation with their good friend Lord Byron. Lord Byron was another very accomplished poet and author in his own right. If you've ever heard of the Don Juan stories, that was Lord Byron that wrote those. So that is how that's the kind of circle that Mary Shelley grew up with and hung out with. Because her dad was famous, she hung out with famous people like William Wordsworth and like Samuel Taylor Coleridge, among others. And then, of course, the younger generation, which had Percy Bysshe Shelley and Lord Byron and John Keats, came up, and Mary Shelley got to become friends with them. In fact, she actually married Percy, so I'd say they were pretty close. But they were in Switzerland in 1816, and they were basically trapped in Byron's place because it was raining so hard outside and because of the storms, and they couldn't go outside and enjoy themselves. But they did find an old book of ghost stories, and so they started telling these ghost stories and scaring each other, and eventually Lord Byron threw down the gauntlet and said, hey, let's all write a ghost story. In fact, let's make a little competition out of it. So everybody tried telling their little ghost stories, and then they were supposed to write them all down. Now, nobody remembers much about Byron's ghost story or Shelley's ghost story or anybody else that was in the cabin at the time. But what Mary Shelley wrote turned out to be Frankenstein. So she had this idea of a man who could bring dead people to life and reanimate them, if you will. And it would have consequences. And she started writing. She was going to write a short story, and Percy was like, "Oh no, make a novel out of it. Let's do this up. Let's do this right." And so, with Percy Shelley's encouragement, Mary Shelley did write Frankenstein. It ended up being published for the first time in 1818, and it also had the title Modern Prometheus. Prometheus is probably most well known for stealing fire from the gods and giving it to mankind, which angered Zeus to a point where he chained Prometheus to a rock for about 10,000 years. But what a lot of people don't know is the backstory prior to the stealing of the fire. Prometheus actually created mankind according to Greek myth. So he created the first man and woman and breathed life into them. It's similar in some ways to the Genesis story where God created Adam and Eve. But it was a godlike creature creating a new life form when he created man, and he made them somewhat close to what the gods were. He didn't give them magical powers or anything like that, but they looked a lot like gods and they acted a lot like gods, and this did not make Zeus happy. So after Prometheus tricked Zeus into accepting the worst parts of the animal to eat and leaving mankind the best parts of the animal to eat, which is why we have such good steaks and cheeseburgers. Zeus got mad, took fire away from the gods, and so Prometheus was a little sad, and he saw man suffering because man was cold and man needed light and man had no way to prepare food and whatnot. So he stole the fire, gave it back to mankind, and of course Zeus punished him. Mary Shelley was only 20 years old when Frankenstein was published. Now, I ask you, what were you doing at 20 years old? Or if you are 20 years old, what are you doing now? Mary Shelley was publishing one of the greatest novels ever written. And again, she would never be able to duplicate that success, but it's a pretty good story in and of itself. That was started off as a bunch of people telling ghost stories in a cabin in Switzerland as a way to kill time during rainstorms, and then turned into a friendly little competition, generated one of the greatest gothic horror novels ever. And it's a story that's been made into probably 100 or so different film versions, and it's a story that still resonates with us today for many reasons. So why would it resonate? Well, let's take a look at the main characters of Frankenstein first. So if you go to the next slide, Dr. Frankenstein is the main character story. Dr. Frankenstein is not the monster. Dr. Frankenstein, well, he kind of is a monster, but he's not the monster. When you think of Frankenstein, you think of Boris Karloff in the movies going, ugh. But that's not who Frankenstein is. Frankenstein is the scientist that brings this monster to life after assembling him from the parts of dead bodies. And then, of course, he ends up regretting his creation and he tracks the monster all over the place in an effort to find him. The monster is another character. In fact, he's a main character. And unlike the movie versions with Boris Karloff, this monster actually is smart enough that he's actually able to educate himself, and he speaks very articulately. In fact, chapters 11 through 16 are narrated by the monster, as he tells Dr. Frankenstein where he's been from the time that Frankenstein created him to the time that Frankenstein finds him at this point. So he's hideous to look at. People are scared of him on sight, and yet what he wants more than anything else is to be loved. He wants to find love somehow. And the fact that he cannot find this love is what will cause all kinds of chaos. And that could be one of your paper topics. When you look at the paper instructions, it says, how is this a story about love? Or unrequited love is probably the best way to put it. Alright? Then we have other minor characters. We have Captain Robert Walton. He is the boat captain that writes letters to his sister, whose name is Margaret Walton Seville. And so we have several narrators throughout Frankenstein. It's kind of odd how this thing is written. The first narrator is not Dr. Frankenstein or the monster. The first narrator is Captain Walton, as he writes letters to his sister. And then he says that he rescued Frankenstein while Frankenstein was near his death, and Frankenstein narrated the entire story to him. And then, of course, we have the narration within the narration when the monster tells his part of the story. And then Walton gets the last word because, I won't ruin the ending for you, but you'll see why. All right, the de Lacy family. This is a family of French people who have been exiled from France. So they end up in Germany, which is where Frankenstein creates this monster. He creates this monster at a university in Germany. So the monster hides out, but he can still see and hear what's going on in the de Lacy home. And he really wants to introduce himself to them, but the monster's seen his reflection in the water. He knows he's hideous to look at. He's very much aware of it. So the de Lacy family is the monster's second attempt, after Frankenstein himself, is his second attempt to try and get some of the love that he so desires. And of course, the de Lacy family is going to reject him. Henry Clerval is a very good friend of Dr. Frankenstein's. He's his best friend. And I won't tell you what his fate is, but it's a gruesome one. All right. William Frankenstein is the youngest brother of Victor Frankenstein. And William Frankenstein is going to get murdered by the monster, but the monster's, again, pretty smart. He's not a dumb monster. So he's going to arrange it in such a way that Justine Moritz, who is the family maid, if you will, or the housekeeper, will end up being falsely accused and executed for William's murder. So that little storyline talks about the justice system and how the justice system can be unjust whenever innocent people get executed for committing murders that they did not commit. And then we've got Elizabeth Lavenza, who is Victor Frankenstein's fiancée. Elizabeth was actually adopted by the Frankenstein family, and Victor is going to basically be raised with her because they're about the same age. And over time, he's going to fall in love with her, and he is actually engaged to be married to her at some point in the story. So you've got that little love interest going on there. Alright, so then we've got the themes, and these are the things that you can write your paper on. So now that we've set the stage for Frankenstein, we know that it's a gothic horror and it's got all kinds of gothic elements in it. In fact, many people write about this frequently. Here are some themes that are addressed, and one is the rise of science. At the time Frankenstein was written, in 1818 was when it was first published, science is starting to answer more questions. Scientific discoveries are starting to change the way people see the world. And this alarms many people, especially the church. Most churches at this time did not want science to take over, because if science answers all of our questions, then where is God's place in this world? There is a belief that science and church cannot coexist. And one of the dangerous things about science, and this is something that you can write a paper on, is how do we use the knowledge we gain from it? Do we use the knowledge for good, or do we use the knowledge for evil purposes? Many people felt that scientists would start using science for very evil purposes instead of using it for good purposes. And in fact, the result of Frankenstein's creation is death and destruction wherever the monster goes. How much knowledge is too much? I mean, at what point do we stop needing the knowledge we need, and at what point, it's the same question like people have with money today. How much money does a multi-billionaire need? How much more money does a multi-billionaire need? We have the same questions about knowledge at the time that science is rising up. This is also a precursor to Darwin. Darwin would not publish Origin of the Species till 1858, which is 40 years after Frankenstein. But you can see where this conflict between science and the church and science and humanity is starting to brew up. Now we got Robert Walton. He's on a scientific expedition somewhere near the North Pole. That's where he's going to find Dr. Frankenstein. That's where he's going to see the monster for the first time. And the monster, of course, will visit him towards the end of the story as well. But, Walton is on a quest to gain knowledge, and he feels that if he gains specific knowledge, and most importantly, he wants to try to find something called the Northwest Passage, which would allow ships to go through the Arctic Circle and go from the Atlantic to the Pacific instead of having to sail so far south and go around South America. He feels like that can make him famous, and it could give him a purpose in life. Of course, Victor Frankenstein is a scientist. He becomes interested in science at a very young age, playing with chemistry kits, reading scientific books. In fact, when he gets to the university in Germany, he's going to find that the scientists there think that the scientists he's been reading are all quacks. But he's very interested in that. In fact, the name of the university is Ingolstadt. Lightning will feature prominently throughout this book. Now, we don't truly know how the monster is brought to life. Frankenstein does not reveal that secret. But if you've seen the movie versions, particularly the 1931 movie version, he is struck into life when lightning strikes a lightning rod that goes down into the creature. And then again, there's that question of how do we use the knowledge we gain? Is it used for good or is it used for evil? So that theme of science is a very important theme throughout the book. Monstrosity is the next theme I want to talk about. And the first question is, who's the bigger monster? Is it the monster because of the murders and because of the destruction and because of all the chaos he's causing? Or is the bigger monster Victor Frankenstein for bringing this monster to life in the first place? Victor Frankenstein, of course, is going to feel guilty. If he never brings this monster to life, people don't die. If he doesn't bring this monster to life, people are not scared, right? So he thinks of himself as a bit of a monster, and I think we as readers can kind of relate to that and say, hey, maybe you are a monster. So who's the bigger monster? The monster, of course, hopes that the other people, and of course we got Victor Frankenstein, we've got the DeLacy family. He does meet up with a little girl later in the story. He hopes that they will love him for his kindness, for what's on the inside, and not so much for his hideous appearance. If he doesn't look so ugly on the outside, the monster feels like he's a loving enough person and a gentle enough person that he can be loved. But because of his outward appearance and the people's reaction to it, the negative reactions, these people feel like, or the monster feels like, he is driven to his monstrosity. He is driven to kill and to take revenge on Frankenstein for creating him and creating him in such a hideous way. And then we got the justice system. It can be a bit monstrous at times when it convicts the wrong people. And again, you've got that story of Justine being convicted for the murder of William. She's an innocent girl. You've got the French family that's been sent out of France, probably, that's the DeLacy family, probably unjustly. Victor Frankenstein himself is going to get arrested and charged with a murder himself that the monster creates. And does he get off or doesn't he get off? Right? What's the justice system going to do there? We've already seen that the justice system will convict and execute innocent people. Now Frankenstein will be on trial for murder. Does he get off or not? And not only that, but did he in some way commit the murder by creating the monster? How does justice system handle that? So monstrosity is a big theme throughout this story that you should consider possibly writing a paper about. The next theme, of course, is love. Um, and of course, I haven't even mentioned the part where Frankenstein's monster wants Frankenstein to create a female version of him so that he can have that love, right? He's never going to get love from a human woman. He's never going to get love from a beautiful woman like Elizabeth or like the DeLacy daughter, the DeLacy daughter, right? He's never going to feel that. But he thinks that if Frankenstein can create a female version of him that's just as hideous, that that female version will fall in love with him, and that he will find that love that he needs. So he blackmails Frankenstein into trying to create this female monster by saying that he will destroy Frankenstein and his entire family if Frankenstein does not follow through and give him that female companion. So when the monster can't get it from existing people, he wants Frankenstein to build him that. Now the problem with that, of course, in Frankenstein's mind is, well, what if this monstrous man and this monstrous woman end up being able to procreate? It could mean the destruction of the human race. That would not be good. So that is a question that is brought up. So, of course, the inability to gain love from anybody fuels the monster's anger and fuels the monster's violence and his violent acts. And then, of course, the monster knows that the best way to get back at Victor Frankenstein for the slights of creating him in such a hideous image, and for not creating the woman, the best way to get back at Frankenstein is to hit him where it hurts, and that is to kill the people that he loves. And he will do that time and again throughout this story. Alright, so again we get the theme of the monster wanting to be loved for his kindness. Like the DeLacy family, you're going to find that the monster is actually very helpful to the DeLacy family. He does it anonymously so that the DeLacy family won't know it's him, but he's hoping that when the DeLacy family does find out, they'll love him for his kindness, but they can't get past the hideous appearance. And then, of course, we've got the monster wondering about his place in the world. Imagine, if you will, being so different from everybody else that you just don't know what your place in this world is. Why do you exist? And that can get back into the God question, which will be the next thing. In fact, let's go ahead and move forward to that. Man playing God. So, of course, we've already talked about Prometheus a good bit, right? Just like Prometheus created mankind in Greek mythology, just like God created mankind in the Garden of Eden, Victor creates a whole new species that's very man-like himself. And does man have the right to do that? Does man have the right to play God? Most people don't think so, right? And people, this goes back to the fear of science. Science could give man the ability to play God and to create in destructive ways. And people were scared to death of that. And so Frankenstein, by creating this new creature and breathing life into it, plays the role of God. Now, God loved Adam. God loved Adam so much that he created Eve for Adam so that Adam would not be alone in the Garden of Eden. And God was like a father figure to him. Victor Frankenstein does not love the monster. He is actually repulsed by the monster, so much so that the monster even makes him sick on occasions. That is not the kind of loving God that we're supposed to be learning about in the New Testament, right? So, this repulsion, should Victor Frankenstein be playing God and creating new life if that new life is going to repulse him to a point where he is thrown back by it? So, of course, then we get chapter 10 where the monster tells Victor Frankenstein that he should be Frankenstein's Adam, but instead he's the fallen angel. This is a reference to Milton's poem Paradise Lost. In Milton's poem Paradise Lost, Satan is a creation of God just like every other human being is. But Satan becomes a fallen angel. And by being a fallen angel, he is cast out of heaven and into hell. And Satan brings a lot of followers with him. So that's the great battle between God and Satan. Before, in fact, that actually occurs before God creates Adam in the poem. So, what is going on here is that instead of being like Adam, the monster is like Satan, and it's evil to the core, and that is a bad thing. And then, of course, we get back to the monster wondering why he was created. We as humans do this, don't we? we look to church, we look to the Bible, we look to science. What is our purpose? Why are we here? Now, the monster is an alien almost in a world of humans. And so he's really wondering, why was I created? Why did Victor Frankenstein do this? Why did he make me? And what am I supposed to do now that I'm here? Especially in a world where he is not loved, where he is actually hated. Of course, the monster wants an Eve, right? Now, that, of course, is something that Victor Frankenstein won't do because he's afraid of the repercussions. If he creates an Adam and an Eve, they could kill off all of mankind. They could be the next step in evolution. Now, Darwin had not written the origin of the species yet, so evolution was not a term that was common at the time. But here's kind of a hint at what's coming, because if these monsters are stronger than mankind and they are more intelligent than mankind, they will wipe mankind out. Just like we as Homo sapiens wiped out the Neanderthals prior, thousands and thousands of years ago. So, the monster wants an Eve very badly. Victor Frankenstein won't create an Eve because it could mean the destruction of all mankind. And so, Victor Frankenstein, because he's the only person in the world or even in the universe, maybe not the whole universe, but he's the only person who knows how to reanimate life and how to create monsters. He also has the power not to do so if he wants to. And so that gives him another godlike quality. I deem thee unworthy of a lover, therefore I will not create you a lover. It's pretty powerful stuff, isn't it? Right? Imagine if God, in the Garden of Eden had done that to Adam. I'm not going to create a woman for you. Right? Well, we wouldn't be here, would we? At least according to Christian legend. Alright, so that is the man playing God theme. So I hope you find these videos and these slideshows in conjunction with each other very helpful. Those are my thoughts on Frankenstein. Again, if you have any other ideas on things you can include in your paper, feel free to write me an email. Feel free to call me during my office hours or whatever, and I'll be more than happy to discuss it with you. And like I said, Frankenstein is a classic, and I hope you truly enjoy it.